Jai Mother. Charanam Sharanam Ramambige, Charanam Sharanam Trayambage. As the night keeps hidden in its gloom, the petition for light, even thus in the depths of my unconscious, rings the cry, I want thee, only thee. Gitanjali. I returned home. I felt exhilarated and was unable to follow my daily routine. Soon after meals, I had some rest and gave myself up to the pleasure of again and again going over the events of the morning. I had not yet a full idea of the magnitude of the happenings of the day, but I could not fail to see that I was on the threshold of something truly great. All that Mother had told me after the initiation kept coming back to my mind. Here I pause and step back to the past years of trials and troubles before meeting Mother. The last few years had been a time of suffering for me. I had lost many of my near and dear ones. I had related to Mother how through all those years I had put all my faith in prayers. At times, faith had wavered, sometimes in bitterness at the sad happenings, sometimes with doubts of whether we could ever perceive the reality behind the veil, or how, if God really hears our prayers, He could heap misery upon misery on us in spite of our trust in Him. At times, I had been troubled too, not understanding where this faith was leading me or how I was being benefited. But though troubled at times with these thoughts, my faith had only grown deeper, and in the end I was made to hold and cling to it alone in the midst of all my troubles. A look of great satisfaction had come into Mother's face when she heard that I had never let go the faith, and she told me how all those prayers and faith had led me to her, and how even a single prayer never went unheard by God. Rays of light began to pierce my darkness, and I began to understand that all those tribulations I had undergone had been steadily paving the way towards her. And these troubled thoughts and promptings of my inner mind in the bygone years had been the forerunners of the great blessing which had been bestowed upon me that day. A great sense of peace stole over me. A new chapter in my life opened, a real emergence from darkness, a life to be lived in the light and love of the Supreme Mother. For the first time, my thoughts went without any bitterness over the sad events, and like a series of pictures, I saw before me the various stages, those bygone years, through which myself and my husband had been led to the path of devotion. It was about 12 years back, around 1938, that we really started on our devotional path. Though we had been God-fearing and religious, it was about that time that my husband lost his only younger brother. He was of a very simple, loving nature, and a deep bond of affection existed between them. During his last days, this brother became deeply religious and had not any thought but of God, and always told my husband that God alone mattered, and that this truth my husband would realize when he loses one dear to him. All was void for my husband after the passing away of his brother, and the truth of the latter's words became evident soon after. Perhaps my husband's destiny or his urgent need to get consolation suddenly turned his mind to intense prayers and pujas. He became a worshipper of Shakti, though very few people were aware of it at first. Such was the passionate intensity of his spontaneous worship that the Divine Mother was never a mere creation of the mind. Devi to him was a living being, ever listening to his prayers and helping him tide over the innumerable difficulties of life. His faith was not out of any visual perception. It was due to an inner awareness of her unseen presence. It was the nature of his dynamic faith that the unseen mother was always with him and that she would protect him. The Divine Mother was to him as intimate as his earthly mother, to help him face the tribulations of everyday life. He would talk to and address the Devi in the carefree manner of a child. Even after midnight, our house would reverberate with his melodious recitings of beautiful passages of Devi's glory. Seeing his sweet and loving intimacy with the unseen goddess, I had often been greatly impressed. Gradually, the great intensity and sincerity of his worship of the Mother Durga drew me as a magnet, and I too spontaneously became a worshipper of the Divine Mother. Strange and inscrutable are the ways of the Almighty. Thus, Almighty Mother became our chosen ideal. How could we ever glimpse or dream then that all this concentrated worship of Shakti, this childlike faith in Mother, the turning towards the unseen power, in the ardor of which we were united participants and sharers, was inspired by the divine will, a part of a preordained plan, the gradual unfolding of an arena which the Supreme Parashakti was preparing for the recognition of her mighty advent, for the ministry of her mercy. O Mother, wonderful and mysterious is thy play in this mighty Avirbhava. At that time, we were living in the south of Travancore. There the worship became more intensified with miraculous interventions of Devi's grace in sorely troubled times. Before long, my husband finished his business there, and we came and stayed at Trichy for some time. Like the rising and receding tides in the sea of samsara, happiness and sorrows sped past one after another in our lives. For us, the past 14 years, till we met Mother in 1949, were a period of mental agony and disquiet. Dark clouds were looming on the horizon, all unknown to us, heralding the approach of the disastrous storm. Tragedy began to overtake my family. My sister-in-law was taken ill, and in the full bloom of her youth was taken away from us all. The great grief of my brother was our grief too. A few months passed, and we were becoming accustomed to the loss, when like a bolt from the blue, the news came that my brother in Tata Nagar had passed away suddenly. Having lost my father very early in my life, the two brothers were just as father to us all. That wonderful brother was generous, big-hearted, loving, and greatly loved by us all. The tears of sorrow dried up in me, for how dare I think of myself when the mother who had given birth to that noble son bore it so bravely. A few months crawled over, miserable gloomy days. My sister had an only son, a student, a noble boy, pure in character, the favorite of his parents and ourselves. To our everlasting sorrow, he too was snatched away after a short illness. I felt bitter with grief, even towards God for permitting this heartless act. I kept the bitter anguish to myself for there too. The sad parents and grandmother had to be considered first. A great gloom fell on our family, a dread of the future. For many days, the house was converted into a temple, and from morning till night, there were only pujas and prayers, mostly to Devi, conducted by Purohits. Gradually, the devotional atmosphere brought about a feeling of peace, and we began to hope that the dark days were over. For every night, there must be a day. Though the ups and downs of life, we continued our way when suddenly, without any warning, tragedy was again in our midst. Here I must pause and pay homage to one who was truly great in every respect, my brother Dr. T. Bhaskaramenu. He was an ornament to his profession and a blessing to his home. He was the tenderest of brothers. He was both brother and father to me. From my childhood, he had stood by me, guided and molded me, and lit in my young heart the fire of fine and noble ideals. I more than loved him, I adored him. Throughout our life, he had been our pillar of strength. It was always to him that we turned for support and guidance. I could never imagine an existence without him. Always unassuming and frank, manly and noble, he had endeared himself to each and everyone who had chanced him to meet him even once. He was an eminent pathologist, and the government deputed him for training in Europe. About a week after his arrival in London, we had a cable. He told us of his sudden demise. The world came crashing about my ears. We rushed home. My heart bled for my mother. Oh, the stricken look on her face. I felt helpless before the stark tragedy. Outwardly, I tried to be calm, but inwardly I was crumbling. I was an expectant mother at that time and was very weak in health. For years, nervous troubles had been coming off and on. I felt I had reached the end of my tether. I became a nervous wreck. 2 miserable weeks followed, and we returned to Trivandrum. The journey back was a trying one, as pain and anguish racked me and threw me into a stage of high nervous tension. On the way, we had to halt at Kottayam, where doctors had to give me morphia and other drugs. Reactions set in. A heavy dullness seized me, and it seemed to me that life itself was a burden. From that moment, a dread of the future began to overwhelm me, a fear of impending doom. Here again, the power of prayers alone helped me to finish the journey without any mishap. The change, the cheerful atmosphere, and the loving help of those around me helped me a little. I tried to shut out all thoughts of my adored brother, but still the thoughts would come and throw me into a mood of deep depression from which I was not able to climb out. I plunged into prayers. Day and night I had no other thought. In prayer alone I found some comfort. A few weeks dragged on, and the hour of my trial came. 3 days of torture passed by while everybody waited helplessly. I was too sick to do anything but pray. I prayed incessantly to Devi to come to my succor. My condition was such that the doctors too were helpless. Here too, the blessing of Devi prevailed. Remembrance came to us about a certain puja which had to be performed in times of trouble. My husband did it and gave me the prasad. Soon after, everything was over as naturally as possible. I slept through the night utterly worn out and weak. I had only a glimpse of the baby. Awaking from the sleep of exhaustion, I began to feel in the silence something ominous. My husband and sister told me that the baby had been removed to another room for fear that my fever might be contagious. On everybody's face, there was an air of make believe, a look of false cheerfulness. The silence continued. No little cry reached my ears. Without any words, I knew that the little life in which we had reposed so many fond hopes had returned to where it came from, having been our son for a few hours. A cry rose from my heart, but it never came out, nor any tears. How could they? The tears were waiting to break their bonds, and flow only at the sight of one who alone could have stemmed their torrents. I even put on an air of cheerfulness. Night came. Thoughts of the little one came crowding into my mind. The fever had begun to rise, and soon everything went into the oblivion of delirium. Later, I learned from my husband how all through the delirious state I had gone on praying to Devi and making my husband to pray. How could it have been otherwise? The all merciful Mother must have been very near indeed, so that in the unconscious state too I might have felt her presence. I even knew it in that delirious state, in another plane of consciousness, that my end was near. There was no fear, but prayers had come spontaneously. I still believe that it was my prayers alone that brought me safe out of that illness. Gradually, consciousness returned to me. I had hated to be dragged back to the sad realities of life and wished very much that I had continued in the oblivion. Slowly the days passed and I began my convalescence. I was surrounded by the deep love and care of my husband, children, and the other members of my husband's family. But all was of no avail. I only grew more and more morose and depressed as each day went by. Most of the time I passed in prayers, but even that failed to bring me any comfort. The outside world would have expected me to be happy and contented, for had I not a loving husband? Was I not the mother of 3 lovable and loving children? Had I not plenty of friends and relations who were only too eager to help me? Yet I was unable to get out of my melancholy mood. All interest in life, even in my children, seemed to have ceased. Always a vague dread haunted me night and day. Sleep forsook me, and all medicines had no effect. And so it was that I came to Madras and was led step by step to the feet of one who had been watching over me in my sickness and my despair, and who now took me in the shelter of her mercy and piloted me to the place of safety, protecting me with her all pervading love and illimitable force. As picture after picture of those sad days came gliding into my mind, the sharp dark streaks and patches of pain and sorrow seemed to melt and disappear in the mellow light of the great understanding that had dawned within me, and they left behind but one message, the message of peace and comfort. O Mother, for the healing of my wounded heart and the wonderful peace thou hast spread over me, I bow low at thy feet in eternal gratitude and surrender. Charanam Sharanam Ramambige, Charanam Sharanam Trayambage. Jai Mother.